Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today we're going to finish a project that I started in my last video. My last video I cleared out some garden beds, and now I'm going to be planting some winter crops. Now, I did not have the energy to film and prepare the beds at the same time, so I wanted to show you kind of what I've done to prepare my beds for the winter vegetables and show you what I'm planting and then plant them in today's video. Now, this is the south side of my house. This is a bed where we used to have tomatoes and some pepita squash. Right next to it we have some sweet potatoes that we'll be harvesting in a week or two. They're not quite ready yet. But what we did with this bed is we pulled out all of the tomatoes. I added a little bit more compost and some peat moss because this is a new bed and it had subsided a bit, so we needed to add some extra soil to it. And then we added an all-purpose fertilizer and added my single layer hoop house. Now I was going to do a double layer hoop house on this side. These are hoops. This is a hoop house that I pre-made for my other beds a while ago. And the double ones just did not fit in here. I actually had to cut this one down to size. These metal beds, this is a Vajayga metal bed, are a little bit smaller than the concrete block beds that I built. This is the last week in September and it's still a bit warm, so we really don't need to put the plastic or anything on this yet. But I decided to get it all set up because it's harder to set it up once the veggies have started growing. Now what we're going to grow in this one is we're going to grow some Chijimisai. I've got 3 of those. We've got 3 kohlrabi. They're called super smelts, and they're huge and delicious, and they don't get woody when they get large. And then we've got 3 cabbages. Now I grew all of these veggies indoors, started them by seed indoors, and then up potted them until we finally hit gallon-sized containers. And the reason that I did that is because I need them to have some size before we hit the freezes. Because once it freezes, the growth on these plants really kind of stops. And the reason I plant these winter plants is I do harvest some of the leaves during the winter, but what it does give me is a really early spring crop. So as soon as it starts to warm up, the growth resumes and we've got an early crop. Sometimes they'll even be ready to harvest in March. So we've got a few weeks until it freezes. Hopefully that's enough time for the roots to get settled. Let me go show you the other beds that I'm going to be filling. Now this is my fall crop of kale and Chijimisai, kohlrabi. You can see they're starting to head up. And then my cabbages that are starting to finally develop heads. They're still small, but they'll be ready within the next month or so. And that should be plenty of time before the first deep freeze. Now these crops can take a frost, so they should be fine uncovered. But if they do need to be covered, what I think I'll do is put a floating row cover or 2 over them if we're going to get a deep freeze early and they're not ready yet. Now the one issue that I'm having problems with is hordes and hordes of grasshoppers. I've never seen as many grasshoppers as this year. You can see what they've done to my beans. They've absolutely decimated them. So I think what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to use these hoop houses, and I'll probably either put shade cloth on them or floating row covers just to keep the grasshoppers off of these new plants. And we're going to do the same thing in this bed as we did in the other bed, except for I'm going to add some chard. We have a yellow chard and a white chard there. We've got kohlrabi, cabbage, and then some kale. So we're going to plant all of that in this bed. We're going to do this same thing in this bed. We've got cabbage and kohlrabi. We've got some Chijimisai over here. We've got some green onions from earlier this year, and then we've got my grasshopper decimated carrots, which really makes me sad. Hopefully they'll survive. Maybe once I get it covered, they'll regrow. They seem to be trying to regrow their tops back. So these 2 beds, they're facing west. So I'm on the west side right over here, and then south is over that way. They get plenty of sun, and when I cover them with a double layer, I don't need to use a frost cloth, and it actually stays warm enough in here that I get really early producing spring crops out of this. Now I've had these hoop houses about 3 years. I've used them for 3 winters and they've worked really well. The only place they didn't work really well is in my lower garden area, and I think that's because cold air settles down in the lower areas, and it was just too cold in my lower garden area. It's a microclimate that did not heat up very well. But here on the south side of the house and that west facing hill, they should do really well. And I'm going to link a video up at the top that shows you how I built those. So let's get planting and then we'll see what it looks like after it's done. Now I wanted to show you the root system on these. These have only been in the gallon containers for probably about 3 or 4 weeks. And they've developed a nice root system, and it's not root bound, so they should take off beautifully in this garden bed. Look how pretty that cabbage is. Now we've already added fertilizer to this garden bed, and we've already added compost, so I'm not going to add any more fertilizer. The only thing I'm going to do is water these in really well after I plant them. Now all we need to do is water these in and then we're done. Let's go plant the ones that I need to plant in my top garden. There we have everything planted, watered in and mulched, ready for the winter except for the plastic, and we don't need the plastic for another several weeks. Hopefully by the time we have the first freeze, these plants will have set their roots in really nicely and will be able to withstand freezing temperatures. And here we have the other one. Now, when I say withstand freezing temperatures, these hoop houses will mitigate a little bit of the temperatures, but it will freeze inside. The ground actually freezes. Now this is the first year I have mulched with straw, so it'll be interesting to see if that stops the ground from freezing in here. But it doesn't get as cold as the outside because everything that is in the hoop house usually survives. Everything, even if it's the same type of produce outside the hoop house, usually dies in the winter. Now I live in Utah, zone 6/7, and when I say 6/7, I mean the last probably 4 winters have been zone 7. Before that, most of the winters were like zone 6, and we have had several winters that were zone 5. You know, previously, about 5 years ago, I would not have budged past saying that we were a zone 5. But the climate does seem to have changed a bit, and things have warmed up, which makes it easier to grow things over the winter here. Now, I would love to hear what you do to grow over the winter. I also grow indoors. I have a grow room, and my next video, well, maybe the one after that, is going to be planting winter crops for growing indoors. And I would love to hear what you do over the winter. Are you in a zone where you can just garden year-round, or are you in zones where you need greenhouses or hoop houses? So please let me know in the comments below what you do to garden over the winter. Now I do have to say this project was a little hard for me to get going. My summer crops are just starting to wind down and I'm a little tired. You know, it is really kind of hard to be outside, especially this time of year with all the harvesting that has to be done, you know, the cleanup that has to be done, to think about starting again. But I have to think forward. I think forward to the middle of the winter when I am wanting some fresh greens, and I can just head out to my hoop houses and pick some kale, pick some chard, pull a couple of cabbage leaves and have something to eat that is homegrown. That makes me happy. And then even further forward to next spring when the cabbages can be harvested, well before the time that I would have harvested if I would have just started the seeds indoors and planted them outside without cover. So winter gardening is forward thinking, even though it may be a little tough to get going when you're tired in the middle of doing your summer cleanup. So I hope this video has been helpful for you. If it's been helpful, please like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.